I wiped the hot mashed potatoes from my face as the entire wedding ballroom fell into a silence so deep I could hear the crystal chandelier gently swaying above us. "Maybe now you'll finally understand your place in this family," my daughter-in-law whispered close enough for only me to hear. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had chased away, whose dreams I had supported even when it meant sacrificing my own. He lowered his eyes, and that hurt far more than the heat still burning against my cheek. I simply reached for my linen napkin, cleaned my face, adjusted the pearl necklace my late husband had given me on our 25th anniversary, and smiled. "Enjoy your wedding, sweetheart," I told her softly. She smiled back, believing she had won. She had no idea that the wedding gift waiting in my purse would change everything. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me the city you're watching from, because I would like to know how far my story has traveled." My name is Margaret Collins, and I was 71 years old on the day I learned that sometimes the cruelest strangers are the people who sit at your own family table. My son Daniel's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day I had experienced since losing my husband, Robert, 4 years earlier. Robert and I had spent 43 years building a life together. 43 years of early morning coffee on our back porch in our little home outside Portland, Oregon. 43 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays, and ordinary moments that became extraordinary because we shared them. When Daniel was born, Robert held him in his arms and said something I never forgot. "One day he'll bring someone home, and she'll become our daughter too." For many years, I imagined that moment. I imagined standing beside my son's bride, helping her choose flowers, sharing old family recipes, passing down the traditions that had filled our home with warmth for generations. When Daniel introduced me to Emily 6 years before the wedding, I wanted more than anything for her to feel welcomed. She was beautiful, intelligent, and confident. She had a bright smile that could convince an entire room that she was kind. And for a while, I believed that smile. I invited her into my kitchen every Sunday. I taught her Robert's famous maple-glazed ham recipe that had been in our family for over 30 years. I gave her my mother's handwritten cookbook, something I had promised myself I would only give to the woman who truly became part of our family. The day I handed it to Emily, tears filled my eyes. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, hugging me. At the time, I thought she meant it. Now, looking back, I realized she was always very good at accepting gifts. She simply wasn't very good at giving kindness back. The first small sign came 3 months after she moved into the apartment Daniel and she rented together. I called Daniel on a Sunday morning. For 30 years, Sunday dinner had been our tradition. No matter how busy life became, Robert, Daniel, and I always found our way back to the same dining table. "Mom, we won't be able to make it tonight," Daniel told me. "Oh, is everything all right?" I asked. There was a pause, a very small pause. But after a lifetime of being someone's mother, you learn that the smallest pauses often hide the biggest truths. "Emily thinks we need to start creating our own traditions." The words were reasonable, even healthy. A newly married couple, or in their case, a couple preparing for marriage, needed their own space. So I smiled into the phone and told them I understood. After we hung up, I still prepared the dinner. Old habits are difficult to break. I peeled the potatoes. I seasoned the roast. I placed 3 plates on the dining table before realizing my mistake. 3 plates. Only one person would be eating. I quietly returned 2 plates to the cabinet. I did not cry. I simply sat alone at the table where my husband once sat at the head, and I ate the meal we used to share as a family. That was the beginning. Not a fight. Not an argument. Not a dramatic moment. Just a tiny crack in something I had always believed was unbreakable. Over the following years, those cracks grew. When Daniel received a promotion and bought his first house, Emily told me they were keeping the process private. I found out they had moved in through a picture on social media. Emily stood in the center of the photograph, holding a glass of champagne. Daniel had his arm around her shoulders. Their friends surrounded them. Even their neighbors were there. Everyone had been invited to celebrate. Everyone except me. When I asked Daniel about it, he sounded surprised. "What do you mean you weren't invited?" That question stayed with me, because it told me something important. He truly believed I had known. Someone had made sure I remained invisible without him ever noticing. Emily never insulted me directly. That was what made her so difficult to explain. She worked in quiet spaces. Between conversations, between invitations, between the words Daniel and I no longer said to each other. If a family dinner was planned, she somehow forgot to tell me. If a vacation was arranged, she assumed I would be too busy. If a holiday celebration happened, she suggested they should keep it small. Small, I later discovered, meant everyone except me. Robert noticed it before he passed away. He was sitting in his favorite armchair one autumn evening, a blanket over his knees as he watched the rain fall outside our living room window. His illness had made him weaker, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. "She's separating him from us," he said quietly. I looked up from my knitting. "Robert, don't say that. Daniel loves us." "He does," my husband replied. "That's why she doesn't attack you openly. If she did, he would see it." I hated admitting it. But he was right. Emily was never the storm. She was the slow leak in the roof. By the time you noticed the damage, years had already passed. After Robert died, things became even more complicated. Daniel visited less. His phone calls became shorter. And Emily suddenly became interested in things she had ignored for years. My home, my savings, my late husband's belongings. "Have you ever considered downsizing?" she asked one afternoon while looking around my living room. The same living room where my husband had taken his final breath. I smiled politely. "No." She smiled back, but her eyes did not. "Well," she said, stirring her tea, "you never know what the future holds." At the time, I thought it was simply a thoughtless comment. Now, standing in that wedding ballroom with the smell of hot potatoes still clinging to my dress, I understood. It had never been a joke. It had never been an accident. And it certainly had not started that day. The humiliation she planned at the wedding was only the moment she finally stopped pretending. And the most painful part was not what she did. It was realizing my son had spent years watching pieces of me disappear. And he had never once asked where they had gone. I looked across the ballroom again. Emily was laughing with her bridesmaids. Daniel stood beside her, smiling for photographs, pretending nothing had happened. Everyone believed the worst moment of my life had just passed. They were wrong. It was only the beginning. The moment the wedding reception continued, people slowly returned to their conversations as if nothing had happened. That was the strange thing about humiliation. It could happen in front of 100 people and still somehow become invisible. Someone turned the music back on. A waiter carried another tray of champagne glasses across the ballroom. The photographer continued asking people to smile. And I stood there with the smell of butter and hot potatoes still lingering on my skin. No one came to ask if I was all right. Not immediately. Not even my son. That was the part that stayed with me. Not Emily's hand. Not her cruel whisper. Daniel's silence. A mother's heart remembers many things. The first time her child says mom. The first time he walks. The first time he reaches for your hand because the world feels too big. But it also remembers the first time he lets go. I looked at Daniel from across the room. He was adjusting his tie while Emily laughed beside him. For a second, I saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The boy who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly because he couldn't stand the idea of hurting something smaller than himself. That boy had been kind, gentle, thoughtful. So where had he gone? That question haunted me more than the pain on my face. I walked toward the restroom, carrying myself as gracefully as I could. My mother used to tell me that dignity was something nobody could take unless you handed it away. So I did not run. I did not make a scene. I walked. Every step measured. Every breath controlled. Inside the restroom, I locked the door behind me. For the first time that day, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than 71. There was a faint redness on my cheek. A small stain of gravy near the collar of my dress. The same navy blue dress Robert had helped me choose years ago for our 40th wedding anniversary. "You look like a queen in that color," he had said. I could still hear his voice. Some memories never leave. They simply become quieter. I took a damp paper towel and carefully cleaned the fabric. Not because I was trying to erase what happened. Because I refused to let Emily decide how the rest of my day would look. As I was fixing my necklace, the restroom door opened. It was Linda, Robert's younger sister. She was 67, stubborn, honest, and incapable of pretending that something was acceptable when it was not. Her eyes immediately found the stain on my dress. Her face changed. "Margaret," she whispered. That was all she said. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew. Everyone knew. They had all seen it. The difference was that most people chose comfort over courage. Linda never had. Tell me you are not going to let this go, she said. I looked down at my wedding gift bag resting beside the sink. A simple white envelope was hidden inside. The envelope Emily had been waiting for all evening. The envelope she believed contained a check. A very large one. Daniel and Emily had no idea that I had planned to give them a substantial wedding gift. After all, I had contributed nearly $40,000 toward the ceremony. The venue, the flowers, the live band, the custom cake that Emily insisted had to be flown in from a bakery in New York. I paid for all of it because I believed I was helping my son begin a beautiful new chapter. Robert and I had saved our entire lives. Not because we loved money, because we loved giving our family opportunities we never had. But somewhere along the way, generosity became expectation. And expectation became entitlement. I picked up the envelope. My fingers rested on the edge. Linda looked at me carefully. What are you going to do? I smiled. The same smile I had given Emily a few minutes earlier. A calm smile. The kind of smile that makes people underestimate you. For now, I said quietly, I'm going back out there. Linda looked surprised. After what she did? Yes. Why? I adjusted my pearl necklace. Because I had learned something after losing Robert. Pain makes people reveal themselves. You don't need to interrupt them. You don't need to fight them. You simply need to let them keep talking until everyone can hear who they really are. Because tonight isn't finished yet, I said. Linda stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a small smile. The kind Robert used to have whenever he knew I had already made up my mind. Your husband would be proud of you, she said. Those words nearly broke me. Nearly. But I had spent 4 years learning how to carry grief without allowing it to collapse me. I lost my husband. I lost the man who protected me for 43 years. I would not lose myself too. When I walked back into the ballroom, the music had changed. The guests were gathering near the dance floor. Emily was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by her friends. Her white dress was perfect, her makeup untouched, her smile brighter than ever. She looked like a woman who had just won. Then she saw me. For a brief moment, confusion crossed her face. She expected tears. She expected me to leave. She expected me to disappear quietly and give her the story she wanted to tell for the rest of her life. Poor Emily. She still did not understand something about old women. We have buried parents. We have buried dreams. Some of us have buried the love of our lives. A little public humiliation is not enough to destroy us. It only reminds us of how much we have survived. I walked back to my seat, placed my purse beside my chair, and waited, because the moment she had been waiting for all night was finally coming. The moment when she would receive her wedding gift. And she had no idea that the contents of that white envelope would change the way everyone in that ballroom looked at her forever. I sat quietly at my table and waited. For the first time that day, I was not waiting for my son to notice me. I was not waiting for my daughter-in-law to apologize. I was not waiting for anyone to remember the woman who had spent decades holding this family together. That waiting was over. I had done enough of it. I had waited outside Daniel's bedroom when he was 7 years old and had a terrible fever, staying awake the entire night with a cold cloth in my hand. I had waited in the parking lot when he was 16 and nervous about his first driving test. I had waited at the hospital when his appendix was removed. I had waited for him to call after he moved out. I had waited for him to visit after Robert died. And for years, I kept telling myself the same thing. He is busy. He is building a life. He will come back. A mother can create 1,000 excuses for a child she loves. Sometimes love is not blind. Sometimes it simply chooses not to look. The wedding guests began gathering near the stage as the master of ceremonies announced that it was time for family speeches. I noticed Emily straighten her posture immediately. She loved moments when people were watching. She always had. She knew exactly how to appear generous when an audience was present. She would compliment a waitress loudly so everyone could hear. She would bring flowers to a neighbor, then make sure a photograph appeared online later that evening. Kindness was not something she offered. It was something she displayed. I learned the difference too late. Daniel walked to the microphone first. The room became quiet. For a moment, I saw my little boy again. The one who used to practice his school speeches in our living room while Robert and I sat on the couch pretending to be his entire audience. Robert would clap the loudest. Every single time. Even when Daniel forgot his words. Even when his hands shook. That's my son, Robert would whisper proudly. That memory came back so clearly that my chest felt heavy. Daniel cleared his throat and looked around the ballroom. I just want to thank everyone for being here today, he began. His voice was confident, happy, like nothing had happened 30 minutes earlier. He thanked Emily's parents. He thanked his friends. He thanked the wedding planner. He thanked the chef. He even thanked the florist for making Emily's vision come true. Then he paused. For a brief second, I wondered if he would look toward me. If he would remember. Not the money. Not the wedding. Just me. The woman who held his hand before his first day of school. The woman who worked extra hours after Robert lost his job in the 1980s so Daniel could keep taking piano lessons. The woman who sold her own jewelry to help pay for his college textbooks. I did not need the room to know those things. I only needed my son to remember. Daniel looked in my direction. My heart moved before my mind could stop it. After all these years, some parts of a mother never become wiser. They only become quieter. Mom, he said. The room turned toward me. A small smile appeared on my face. A tiny piece of hope I should have buried years earlier began to breathe. Thank you for always supporting us, Daniel continued. The words were polite. Beautiful even. The kind of sentence people write inside greeting cards. But something was missing. Something that only a mother could hear. He was thanking me like a guest. Not like family. Like someone who had donated money to a cause. Not the woman who had given him her entire life. Still, I nodded. I smiled. Because I had learned that dignity sometimes means accepting a small piece of kindness, even when you know it is not enough. The guests applauded. Emily walked to Daniel's side and kissed his cheek. Then she took the microphone, and the entire room changed. I also want to thank Margaret, she said sweetly. Her voice was covered in honey. The same voice she used whenever she wanted people to believe she was the perfect daughter-in-law. Several guests smiled toward me. They had no idea. They had not heard what she whispered when she pushed my face into those potatoes. They had not seen the satisfaction in her eyes. We couldn't have created this perfect wedding without her generosity. She turned toward me with a smile. She has always been so passionate about taking care of everyone. A few people laughed softly. It was presented as a compliment. But I knew Emily. Every word she spoke had a second meaning. Then she continued. And now that Daniel and I are starting our own family, it's time for Margaret to finally relax. The room remained quiet. Most people probably thought it was a lovely thing to say. A sweet message. But I heard the door closing behind those words. The same door she had been slowly shutting for 6 years. No more Sunday dinners. No more holidays. No more family traditions. No more place for me in the home Robert and I had spent our lives building through our son. Emily raised her champagne glass. To new beginnings, she said. Everyone repeated the toast. To new beginnings. I lifted my own glass. I looked directly into her eyes. And I smiled. Because for the first time in 6 years, I finally understood something. Emily did not hate me because I had done something wrong. She hated me because I represented a part of Daniel's life she could never control. His memories. His childhood. The love that existed long before she arrived. She thought removing me from the future would erase my place in the past. She was wrong. When the applause ended, Emily handed the microphone back to the master of ceremonies. The next part of the reception was supposed to be the presentation of gifts and special messages from close family members. I saw her glance toward my purse. Just for a second. But it was enough. There it was. The real Emily. The woman who could humiliate me in public and still wait excitedly for what I might give her afterward. She believed the white envelope inside my purse contained a check. A large check. Perhaps large enough for a honeymoon upgrade. A down payment on a bigger house. Maybe something she had already spent in her mind. She did not know that I had changed what was inside that envelope the night before the wedding. After a conversation I never expected to have. A conversation with someone who had been watching everything. Someone who loved Robert almost as much as I did. And someone who had given me a piece of advice that would make this wedding unforgettable. Not because of the humiliation, but because the truth was finally about to sit down at the same table as everyone else. The moment I touched the white envelope inside my purse, I remembered the conversation that had changed everything. It happened the night before the wedding. Long before the music. Long before the smiles. Long before hot mashed potatoes became the final proof of something I had spent years refusing to admit. I was sitting alone in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had taught Daniel how to make his first grilled cheese sandwich when he was 8 years old. The same kitchen where Robert used to stand every Sunday morning making coffee before I even got out of bed. Some rooms remember the people who loved inside them. The walls do not speak. But they keep their silence differently after someone is gone. I had spent the evening preparing my wedding gift. A white envelope. Inside it was a cashier's check for $200,000. Robert and I had saved that money for years. Not for ourselves. Not for vacations. Not for expensive cars or luxury. We saved it because we believed that one day, when our son started his own family, we could give him a foundation stronger than the one we had started with. That was our dream. A better beginning for our child. I looked at Robert's photograph sitting on the kitchen shelf. The one taken during our 40th wedding anniversary. He was smiling. The same quiet smile that always made me feel safe. I hope we did enough, I whispered to the photograph. And at that moment, my phone rang. It was Linda, Robert's sister. My sister-in-law for over 4 decades. My friend. My witness. Margaret, she said without any greeting. Are you sure about tomorrow? I looked at the envelope on the table. What do you mean? I mean Emily. Her name hung between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because some truths are painful not because we do not know them, but because we finally have to say them out loud. I know she's difficult, I answered. Linda was quiet. Then she sighed. No, Margaret. Difficult is someone who forgets your birthday or shows up late to dinner. I closed my eyes. I already knew where the conversation was going. She humiliates you. The words were simple. That was what made them hurt. Not because they were cruel. Because they were accurate. She's young, I said. She's still learning. I had said those words for years. I said them after she excluded me from holidays. I said them after she posted pictures of family vacations I was never invited to. I said them after she turned my Sunday dinners into old traditions that nobody had time for anymore. I defended her more than she deserved. Maybe because admitting the truth about Emily meant admitting something even more painful. My son had allowed it. Linda knew me too well. She heard the silence behind my excuses. Robert saw it too, she said. My fingers tightened around the phone. I know. Do you remember what he said 6 months before he passed? Of course I remembered. I remembered everything about those final months. Every doctor's appointment. Every pill bottle. Every night I pretended to be asleep because I did not want Robert to hear me crying beside him. A person does not forget the final conversations with the love of their life. He said that love without respect becomes obligation. I whispered. Yes. Linda's voice softened. And he never wanted you to live your final years as an obligation. I looked at the envelope again. $200,000. A number. But behind that number were thousands of mornings Robert woke up before sunrise. Thousands of hours I spent managing our home and working part-time when Daniel was in college. Years of choosing practical things over luxurious ones. It was not just money. It was 43 years of marriage folded into a piece of paper. Do you think I'm making a mistake? I asked. Linda did not answer immediately. She had always been careful with important words. You are asking the wrong question. What is the right one? Would Robert want his last gift to become a reward for someone who has spent years trying to erase his wife? I could not answer, because I already knew. The silence between us became my answer. That night, after we ended the call, I did something I never imagined I would do. I opened the envelope. I removed the check. I placed it back inside my safe. Next to Robert's watch. Next to our old photographs. Next to the letters he wrote me during the first year we were married. Then I took out another document. Not a check. Not a gift. A letter. A letter I had written with trembling hands, but a clear mind. A letter explaining exactly how I felt. A letter that would force Daniel and Emily to see me not as a wallet. Not as a servant. Not as an old woman waiting quietly in the corner. But as the person who built the very life they were standing on. I sealed the envelope again. And for the first time in many years, I slept peacefully. Not because I was planning revenge. I was not. Revenge is about hurting someone. What I wanted was something much simpler. I wanted the truth to stand in the same room as the lies. Now, back at the wedding reception, I watched Emily laugh with her friends. She occasionally looked toward my purse. A quick glance. A small movement. But after 6 years, I had become an expert at noticing the things people try to hide. She was waiting. Waiting for the moment she could open that envelope. Waiting for the reward she believed she had earned. And that was the tragedy of it all. She never understood that kindness given with love is a gift. Kindness demanded through cruelty is a transaction. And I was no longer willing to pay. The master of ceremonies stepped toward the microphone again. Now, he said with a smile, we would like to invite the groom's mother, Margaret Collins, to come forward and share a few words with the newlyweds. The ballroom filled with applause. Emily smiled immediately. A perfect smile. A public smile. The kind she always wore when she believed she was about to receive something. Daniel looked relieved. Maybe he thought this was the moment everything would return to normal. Maybe he believed his mother would stand up, ignore the humiliation, and give another piece of herself to keep everyone comfortable. For 71 years, I had been many things. A daughter, a wife, a mother, a widow, a woman who forgave more than she should have. But tonight, I was going to become something I had forgotten how to be. Someone who finally spoke. I picked up my purse, took the white envelope into my hands, and walked toward the stage. The entire room expected to witness a mother giving her son the greatest gift of his life. They were right. They just had no idea what that gift would actually be. I walked toward the stage slowly, not because I was afraid, not because my legs were weak. I walked slowly because after 71 years of life, I had learned that the most important moments should never be rushed. Every step carried a memory. The first time I walked toward Daniel in the hospital nursery. The first time I walked beside him on his first day of kindergarten while he held my hand so tightly that my fingers turned white. The day I walked him into his college dorm room and waited until he closed the door before allowing myself to cry in the parking lot. And now, I was walking toward him again. Only this time, I wondered whether he still recognized the woman who had walked beside him his entire life. The guests applauded as I reached the microphone. I placed the white envelope on the podium. I could feel Emily's eyes fixed on it. She tried to hide her excitement. She failed. After 6 years of knowing her, I could read her expressions better than she thought. Her smile became a little brighter. Her posture changed. Her fingers wrapped around Daniel's arm as if she was already celebrating something she had not received. Daniel smiled at me. For a moment, I saw guilt in his eyes. A small shadow. A quiet understanding that something terrible had happened earlier. But guilt without action is only another form of silence. And silence had been the language that separated us for too many years. I looked around the ballroom. Friends, family, people who had watched Daniel grow up, people who attended Robert's funeral and promised they would always be there for me. Many of them had seen what happened with the mashed potatoes. Many had looked away. I did not blame all of them. The truth is, uncomfortable moments make people uncomfortable. Most people do not choose cruelty. They simply choose not to stand between cruelty and its victim. And sometimes, that choice causes its own kind of wound. I adjusted the microphone. The room became quiet. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began. My voice did not shake. That surprised even me. Before I give Daniel and Emily my wedding gift, there are a few things I would like to say. Emily's smile remained. She nodded politely. She was still playing the role of the grateful bride. I have spent the last 6 years trying to welcome Emily into our family. A few guests smiled. They expected a beautiful story, a sentimental speech, the kind of speech a mother gives at her son's wedding. I gave her my mother's cookbook. Emily's smile flickered. Only for a second. I shared recipes that had been passed through generations. The room was silent. I opened my home every Sunday because I believed that family was something we built around a table. I paused. The same kind of table where, only an hour earlier, my face had been pushed into a bowl of hot mashed potatoes. I did not mention it yet. I did not need to. Not yet. After Robert died, I believed that if I loved harder, gave more, and stayed quieter, I could keep my family together. My eyes moved toward Daniel. My greatest mistake was believing that silence was the same thing as peace. Daniel lowered his eyes. For the second time that evening. And once again, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. When someone slowly removes you from photographs, traditions, holidays, and conversations, it does not happen all at once. I looked at the guests. It happens one small moment at a time. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Because they remembered. They remembered the Christmas I was not invited to. The housewarming party I learned about through social media. The family vacations where my place was quietly erased. They had witnessed pieces of the story. They simply never placed them together. Until now, I spent years asking myself what I had done wrong. I placed my hand over the envelope. Was I too old? Too involved? Too difficult? My voice softened. The answer was no. The room was completely still. My only mistake was continuing to offer love to people who had stopped treating it as a gift. Emily's expression finally changed. The smile disappeared. Just a little. Like a mask beginning to crack. She looked toward Daniel. perhaps expecting him to interrupt me, perhaps expecting him to defend her. But he remained silent. This time, that silence did not belong to me. It belonged to him. I know some of you are wondering why I am saying these things on such a special day. I looked directly at Emily. It is because special days reveal what ordinary days hide. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Emily straightened her shoulders. Margaret, maybe we should talk privately. No, I said it calmly. Not loudly. Not angrily. But it was the first time in 6 years that I had not allowed her to control where and when my feelings could be expressed. We have had many private moments, Emily. My fingers rested gently on the pearl necklace Robert had given me. And somehow, they always ended with me apologizing for being hurt. Several guests looked at each other. They understood. They had seen it before. The polite jokes. The small insults disguised as humor. The quiet exclusion. The way a person can be pushed out of a family without anyone ever admitting they pushed. Then I looked at the white envelope. The envelope Emily had been waiting for all night. I lifted it. Her eyes followed it immediately. Even now, even after everything, she was still thinking about what was inside. That was the saddest part. Not the potatoes. Not the humiliation. Not even the years I lost trying to earn a place in my own family. It was realizing that she could watch a woman she called family suffer and still wonder whether there was a check waiting for her afterward. I looked at my son, Daniel. His eyes met mine. I promised your father that I would always give you what you needed. Tears filled his eyes. Perhaps he thought he knew what was coming. Perhaps everyone did. But they were all wrong. Tonight, I am finally going to keep that promise. And with those words, I opened the envelope. The entire ballroom leaned forward, waiting, Emily most of all, because she believed she was about to receive the greatest gift of her life. She had no idea that what was inside would cost her far more than money. The room became so quiet that I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner above the ballroom. 100 people, 100 breaths held at the same time, all because of a simple white envelope. It was strange, really. For years, I had begged silently for someone to notice my pain. My empty chair at Christmas, my missing place in family photographs, the Sunday dinners that slowly disappeared. Nobody noticed those things. But the moment money entered the room, everyone paid attention. That was a lesson age had taught me many times. People often ignore a broken heart. They rarely ignore a closed wallet. I slowly pulled the paper from the envelope. I saw Emily's eyes brighten. Just for a second. A tiny movement. Almost impossible to notice unless you had spent 6 years watching someone carefully. That was her mistake. She thought I had spent those 6 years suffering. In truth, I had spent them learning. Learning every expression. Every fake smile. Every compliment with a hidden blade behind it. Every moment she looked at me not as Daniel's mother, not as Robert's widow, not as a woman who had loved and sacrificed, but as a door standing between her and something she wanted. A house. A bank account. A lifestyle. A future she believed she deserved. $200,000, I said softly. The room reacted immediately. A few guests whispered. Someone inhaled sharply. Even Daniel looked surprised. I had never told him the amount. Robert and I had never talked about our savings as something our son was entitled to. We saw it as a blessing. A gift from two people who spent 43 years building a life from almost nothing. When we married, Robert and I lived in a small apartment with furniture we bought from a second-hand store. Our first dining table had one leg shorter than the others. Robert folded a piece of cardboard and placed it underneath so it would stop shaking. For 10 years, every family meal was eaten at that crooked table. Daniel learned to read at that table. He drew his first pictures there. He did his homework there while I prepared dinner. We never complained, because love filled the spaces that money could not. Years later, when Robert started his own construction business and our lives became more comfortable, we never forgot those early days. That was why we saved. Not to create spoiled children, not to buy affection, but to help the next generation stand a little taller. I looked at Daniel. My father and mother never left me money, I said. They left me values. His eyes filled with tears. He knew exactly what I meant, because Robert had taught him the same things. Work hard, respect people, never confuse kindness with weakness, and never bite the hand that spent years feeding you. I turned toward Emily. Her expression remained calm. She was good at pretending. I would give her that. But I noticed her fingers tightening around her champagne glass. She was nervous. For the first time that evening. Daniel, I continued. Your father and I saved $200,000 to give you on your wedding day. Emily finally smiled again. A small smile. A relieved smile. She thought the speech was over. She thought this was the moment she had been waiting for. She had no idea it was only the beginning. I brought that check with me yesterday, I said. The smile froze. Only slightly. But I saw it. So did I continued, until I asked myself a question. I held up the paper in my hand. Would Robert want his final gift to reward people who had forgotten his greatest lesson? No one moved. No one spoke. Even the musicians behind the stage remained completely still. I looked at my son. Your father always said that a person's true character is revealed by how they treat those who can give them nothing. Daniel's face changed. Because he understood. Not just my words. The meaning behind them. The years behind them. The Christmas mornings. The ignored phone calls. The birthdays with excuses. The moments when he chose comfort over courage. I spent many nights after your father died sitting alone in our living room, I said. The same living room where he spent his last days. My voice became softer. Not weaker. Just honest. I would look at his empty chair and wonder how our family became so crowded with people and yet so empty of love. A few guests lowered their eyes. Some of them had known. Some had watched. Some had chosen silence because it was easier. Silence is comfortable when the pain belongs to someone else. I had learned that too. Then I unfolded the document completely. The paper made a small sound. A simple sound. But in that silent room, it felt louder than the music that had filled the ballroom all night. This, I said, holding it up, is not a check. Emily's face changed immediately. The color drained from her cheeks. What? She whispered. She did not mean to say it aloud. But she did. For the first time all evening, she forgot to perform. She forgot to smile. She forgot to pretend. She simply reacted. And that reaction told the room more than any speech I could have given. This is a letter, I continued. A letter from a mother who spent too many years remaining quiet. Emily stepped forward. Margaret, this is inappropriate. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Not concern for what happened earlier. Only concern for what she was losing. I smiled gently. The same smile I gave her when she pushed my face into the mashed potatoes. The difference was that this time, she understood it. She realized I was no longer standing in a corner waiting to be accepted. I was standing in the center of the room, finally allowing myself to be seen. Inappropriate. I repeated quietly. No, Emily. I looked around at every person in that ballroom. The inappropriate moment happened an hour ago when a bride humiliated her husband's mother and expected a reward afterward. The room went completely still. Several guests turned toward Emily. Some looked shocked. Others looked ashamed, because they had witnessed it. And now, they could no longer pretend they hadn't. Emily opened her mouth to speak. But for the first time in 6 years, she had no words powerful enough to control the story. I lowered my eyes to the letter. The letter I had written with tears I refused to let anyone see. The letter that carried 43 years of marriage. A lifetime of motherhood. And the final lesson Robert would have wanted his son to learn. I took a slow breath. Then I began to read. Dear Daniel. The moment I said his name, my voice became softer. Not because I was afraid. Not because I regretted standing there. But because no matter how much pain exists between a mother and her child, his name will always carry the memory of the first time she whispered it. I remembered holding him in the hospital room 50 years ago. Robert standing beside me with tears in his eyes. The man who never cried at sad movies. Never complained about working 16-hour days. Never showed weakness in front of anyone. But when he held his son for the first time, his hands shook. That's our boy, he whispered. Our boy. Not my investment. Not our retirement plan. Not someone who owed us a debt. Just our boy. I looked up from the letter. Daniel was already crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The same way Robert used to cry. Quietly. As if he was embarrassed by his own heart. For years, that would have been enough to make me stop. For years, one tear from my son could erase every wound. That was my weakness. I loved him so much that I allowed myself to become invisible. But love without self-respect eventually teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches people that they can take from you forever, and you will still thank them for it. So I continued reading. Dear Daniel, if you are hearing these words, it means your wedding day has arrived. A few guests looked confused. They expected anger. They expected a fight. They expected me to expose Emily and humiliate her the way she had humiliated me. But this was never about revenge. Robert did not raise me to destroy people. He taught me to show them the truth and allow them to face themselves. I spent most of my life trying to be the kind of mother who made your path easier. My hands trembled slightly, not because of fear, because memories are heavy, even when they are beautiful. I packed your lunches before sunrise. I sat through every school concert, even when you only played 3 notes on the trumpet. I worked extra shifts when money was tight because I never wanted you to feel the weight of our struggles. The room was completely silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier. A different silence. The silence of people remembering their own mothers. Their own fathers. The people who gave everything quietly, without asking for applause. I never wanted anything in return except one thing. I paused. Daniel looked at me. His face was no longer the face of a groom celebrating his wedding. It was the face of a little boy realizing he had broken something precious. Respect. That single word remained in the room. Simple, small, but heavier than every decoration in that expensive ballroom. You do not have to call me every day. Daniel lowered his eyes. You do not have to spend every holiday with me. Emily shifted beside him. You do not have to agree with every choice I make. I took a breath. But you must never allow someone to treat me as if I have no place in the family that I helped build. Emily crossed her arms. A defensive gesture. A familiar gesture. The same one she used every time she was confronted with a truth she did not like. Margaret, this is unfair, she interrupted. Her voice was calm. Too calm. The voice of a person still trying to control the room. You're turning our wedding into a personal attack. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, I felt no anger. That surprised me. After 6 years of small wounds, I thought I would feel satisfaction watching her lose control. I did not. I felt tired. Tired of explaining my humanity to someone who only measured my value by what I could provide. Emily, I said quietly, an attack is when someone takes a woman who spent 43 years building a family and pushes her face in a hot food in front of everyone she loves. A murmur moved through the guests. Several people looked down. Some looked away, because they had seen it happen. And now they had to accept that their silence had also been part of the moment. Emily's expression hardened. It was a joke. There it was. The oldest excuse in the world. Cruelty wearing a costume called humor. I nodded. Yes. My voice remained calm. That is what people often say when they realize everyone else saw what they tried to hide. For the first time all evening, Emily had no immediate response. No perfect smile. No charming explanation. Only silence. The same silence she had forced me to live inside for years. I turned back to Daniel. I am not reading this letter to punish you. My eyes filled with tears, but I did not let them fall. I am reading it because your father spent his final months worrying about me. That sentence changed everything. Daniel looked up immediately. Dad knew, he whispered. The question broke my heart. Not because he asked it, because he had never asked before. He had never wondered why his father grew quiet whenever family plans changed. Why Robert squeezed my hand under the dinner table whenever Emily made another comment disguised as a joke. Why he started saying, "Take care of your mother," more often during his final year. Yes, I answered. He knew. The room became still again. Even Emily looked away. For the first time, she was not looking at the envelope. Not looking at the guests. Not looking for a way to win. She was realizing that this story had begun long before tonight. Long before the mashed potatoes. Long before the wedding. It had been built one ignored phone call at a time. One forgotten invitation at a time. One moment of silence at a time. I looked down at the letter again. There was still one part left. The part one had struggled to write. The part one had rewritten 5 times before the wedding. Because it was not about what Daniel had lost. It was about what he still had the chance to save. I took a slow breath. My fingers tightened around the paper. Then I continued. Daniel, there is one final gift your father and I wanted to leave you. Daniel, there is one final gift your father and I wanted to leave you. The words remained in the air. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody reached for a glass. Nobody whispered. Even the servers standing near the walls seemed frozen. Because everyone in that ballroom believed the next sentence would be about money. A check. A trust fund. A piece of property. Something that could be counted, measured, deposited. That was the tragedy of the entire evening. So many people had spent their lives learning the value of $1. So few had learned the value of a person. I looked at my son. His eyes were red, not from shame alone, but from the realization that he had Missed years of moments he could never recover. A child believes his parents will always be there. That no matter how many birthdays he misses, no matter how many calls he doesn't return, no matter how many times he chooses convenience over kindness, his mother will simply wait. And for many years, I did. I waited through lonely Christmas mornings. I waited through silent Sundays. I waited through the anniversaries of Robert's death, when the house felt so quiet I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway counting every second. Tick, tick, tick. A reminder that time moves forward whether we make peace with our loved ones or not. I looked back at the letter. Daniel, your father and I wanted to leave you something more valuable than money. A tear finally escaped his eye. He did not wipe it away. Perhaps because for the first time in years, he understood that some things should not be hidden. We wanted to leave you the ability to look in the mirror at the end of your life and know that you were a good man. The room was still. I could feel people holding their breath. Not because I was exposing a secret, but because they were asking themselves the same question. Had they called their mothers enough? Had they thanked the people who sacrificed for them? Had they mistaken familiarity for permission to neglect someone? I never wanted a son who was rich. I continued. I wanted a son who was kind. Daniel covered his mouth with his hand. The same habit he had as a child whenever he was trying not to cry. A small habit I had not seen in years. A piece of my little boy returning for a moment. Your father worked until his hands were rough because he believed providing for his family was a privilege. I looked down at my own hands. Older now. Wrinkled. The hands that had packed thousands of school lunches. Washed countless dishes. Held my husband's hand during his final breath. These hands built your childhood, Daniel. My voice became quieter. Not because I expected anything back. I paused. But because love is what mothers do. The guests lowered their eyes. A woman near the back reached for her husband's hand. An older man removed his glasses and quietly wiped his face. The truth is, everyone in that room had someone who once sacrificed for them. Someone who had stayed awake when they were sick. Someone who had worried when they were late getting home. Someone who had celebrated their smallest victories as if they were miracles. We all come from someone's love. Sometimes we just forget. Then I turned the page of the letter. The final page. The page that had taken me the longest to write. Daniel, I was going to give you $200,000 today. A quiet wave passed through the ballroom. Even though they already knew the number, hearing it again made the reality heavier. That money was meant to help you build a home filled with respect, patience, and kindness. I looked directly at him. Not a house. The distinction mattered. A house could be purchased. A home had to be created. And I had learned that some of the most expensive houses in America could still be the loneliest places in the world. I realized something the night before your wedding. I slowly folded the letter in my hands. Money does not fix a lack of respect. I looked toward Emily. She stood very still. Her face had changed. The confidence from earlier was gone. The woman who whispered cruel words while pressing my face into a plate of hot mashed potatoes was nowhere to be found. Now there was only someone trying to understand why the evening she had carefully controlled was slipping away. I will not give a gift that teaches someone they can hurt another person and still receive a reward. The words were calm. They were not spoken with anger. That was important, because anger would have made this a fight. The truth made it a lesson. Emily finally stepped forward. Are you saying you're taking away our wedding gift because of one mistake? Her voice trembled, not with sadness, with disbelief. She truly could not understand. That was the most painful part. After 6 years of small humiliations, after the holidays, the exclusions, the comments hidden behind smiles, and finally what happened tonight, she still believed this was about one moment. I shook my head. No, Emily. My voice was almost gentle. This is not because of one mistake. I looked at Daniel, then back at her. This is because of 1,000 choices. The Christmas I was not invited. The family pictures I was missing from. The Sunday dinners that disappeared. The home you wanted me to leave before I was ready. The moments you made me feel like a guest in my own family. Each one was small enough to deny. But together, they became a lifetime of loneliness. Daniel lowered his head. He knew it was true. Because deep down, he had always known. He had simply chosen not to look. I took a breath and held the envelope against my heart. The money is still there. Several people looked up, including Emily. For a second, hope returned to her face. And that was exactly what revealed everything. Not concern, not apology. Hope. Hope that the check still existed. I noticed it. Everyone noticed it. And for the first time that night, she realized that everyone was watching her the way she had watched me for years. Carefully, silently, seeing what she thought she had hidden. I looked at my son. My final decision about that money depends on what you choose to do next, Daniel. A shock moved through the ballroom. Because suddenly, this was no longer a story about a mother and a daughter-in-law. It was about a son standing between the woman who gave him life and the woman he had chosen to build his future with. And for the first time on his wedding day, Daniel understood that saying nothing was no longer an option. The entire room waited for him to speak. Daniel stood there without saying a word. For the second time that evening, the entire room was waiting for him. But this time, it was different. Earlier, when Emily pushed my face into the hot mashed potatoes, his silence had protected the person who hurt me. Now, his silence would reveal the man he had become. I did not look away. Not because I wanted to shame him. Not because I wanted to win. A mother does not spend 50 years loving her child just to enjoy watching him suffer. I looked at him because I needed to know. I needed to know if the little boy Robert and I had raised was still somewhere inside the man standing in front of me. The room was so quiet I could hear Daniel breathing. His eyes moved toward Emily. She immediately stepped closer to him, a habit she had developed over the years. Not holding his hand for comfort, not standing beside him as a partner, positioning herself between him and anyone who might challenge her. I had noticed that years ago, at Christmas dinners, at birthdays, at every family gathering where Daniel and I started having a genuine conversation, she would suddenly appear. Daniel, can you help me with something? Daniel, come meet my friends. Daniel, we need to leave soon. Always polite, always smiling, always just enough to separate us without making anyone question it. For years, I convinced myself I was imagining it, because admitting the truth would have meant admitting I was losing my son one quiet moment at a time. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom, that one word almost broke me, because I had waited years to hear him say it like that again. Not like a responsibility, not like an obligation, but like a son reaching for his mother. I didn't know it was this bad. A few people in the room nodded. They expected me to accept that answer, to comfort him, to tell him everything was fine. That was what I had always done. When he failed a test in high school, I told him one grade did not define him. When his first girlfriend broke his heart, I stayed up all night making him hot chocolate and listening to him cry. When he made mistakes, I always made sure he knew he was still loved. That is what mothers do. But love does not mean protecting someone from the truth forever. I took a slow breath. Daniel, that is the part that hurts the most. His eyes filled with tears. Mom, I know. My voice remained gentle, but firm. Listen. He became silent, just like he had expected me to be silent all these years. I believe you when you say you didn't see everything. I paused, but you saw enough. His face changed, because he knew I was right. You saw the Christmas invitations that never came. You saw me finding out about your new home through a photograph online. You saw how every tradition your father and I created slowly disappeared. You heard the jokes that made me the punchline. I looked toward Emily. She immediately crossed her arms. A wall. Always a wall. And tonight, Daniel, you saw her put my face in a hot food in front of everyone who loves us. No one moved. No one defended her. Because some moments become impossible to explain away. Daniel looked at the floor, the same way he did when he was 12 years old and accidentally broke Robert's favorite fishing rod. Back then, he had come to us crying before we even discovered what happened. He had said, I made a mistake. Robert had hugged him and told him something I would never forget. A mistake does not tell me who you are, son. What you do after the mistake does. For years after Robert died, I repeated those words to myself. Tonight, Daniel needed to hear them again. Your father once told you that character is not measured when everything is easy. I said, it is measured in the moments when doing the right thing costs you something. Daniel slowly looked up, and for the first time that evening, I saw something I had not seen in years. Not guilt, not embarrassment, awareness. The painful moment when someone realizes they have been asleep while someone they love was suffering. Emily stepped forward. Daniel, don't let her manipulate you. The words fell into the room like a glass breaking on the floor. Not because they were loud, because they were revealing. Several guests looked at her with shock. Even her own parents looked uncomfortable. Her mother lowered her eyes. Her father tightened his jaw. I wondered if this was the first time they had seen this side of their daughter. Or if they had spent years excusing it the way I had spent years excusing my son's silence. Manipulate, Daniel whispered. It was the first thing he had said to Emily all night. She quickly reached for his arm. She's doing this because she's angry about the gift. The room became even quieter. There it was. Not the humiliation. Not the years of distance. Not my pain. The money. Even now, she believed everything came back to the check. Daniel slowly pulled his arm away. A small movement. Most people probably would not have noticed. But I did. Because mothers notice the smallest changes. The first step. The first word. The first time their child chooses to stand on his own. Emily, he said quietly. She froze. I don't think she had expected him to use that tone. Not angry. Not loving. Just disappointed. Did you really do all those things? Her eyes widened. What? The holidays. His voice grew stronger. The pictures. She opened her mouth. The comments. Daniel, you're not seriously believing the mashed potatoes. That was the moment. The moment she could no longer hide behind explanations. Because everyone had seen that one. There was no missing invitation to deny. No private conversation to twist. No forgotten phone call to explain away. 100 people had watched her humiliate an elderly woman who had helped pay for the very celebration they were attending. Daniel waited. For the first time in years, he was not waiting for someone else to tell him what to believe. He was demanding the truth. And Emily's answer would determine not only what happened to the money, it would determine what kind of marriage had begun in that ballroom. She looked around the room. At her parents. At the guests. At me. At the envelope she thought would change her future. Then she did something I had expected. Something that told me she had still learned nothing. She smiled. A small, controlled smile. The same smile she had worn 6 years earlier when I gave her my mother's cookbook. The same smile she wore every time she took something from me. And she said, "You're all making this into something much bigger than it really was. You're all making this into something much bigger than it really was." Emily's words floated through the ballroom. Cold. Controlled. Almost rehearsed. And in that moment, I understood something I should have accepted years earlier. Some people do not apologize because they believe they did nothing wrong. They apologize only when they realize there are consequences. And Emily had not reached that point yet. She still thought she could smile her way out of the truth. She still believed the same charm that had fooled me 6 years ago would work on everyone else. She was wrong. Daniel stared at her. Not with anger. That would have been easier. Anger fades. Disappointment stays. For the first time since he was a child, my son looked like a man who was seeing something he had refused to see for years. Something bigger than it really was, he repeated. Emily immediately softened her voice. The same voice she used with waiters, neighbors, and anyone she wanted to impress. Daniel, sweetheart, it was just a joke. A joke. Again. That word. I had heard it many times before. When she removed my chair from the Thanksgiving table because there was not enough room. Oh, Margaret, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. When she introduced me to her friends as Daniel's old-fashioned mother who still thinks everyone should eat Sunday dinner together. Come on, Margaret. I'm just teasing. When she laughed about how I kept Robert's old sweaters in my closet because I still missed him. You have to move on someday. It was only a joke. Every wound came wrapped in a smile. Every insult came dressed as humor. And every time I questioned myself. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I was too old-fashioned. Maybe I expected too much. That is the cruel thing about small acts of disrespect. One by one, they can make a person doubt their own pain. Until the day someone pushes your face into hot mashed potatoes in front of your entire family. Then suddenly, all the little moments stand together. Like pieces of a photograph that was torn apart and finally put back together. Daniel took a step backward, away from Emily. It was not a dramatic movement. Not a scene from a movie. Just a small step. But I had been his mother long enough to understand what it meant. When Daniel was 5 years old, he used to take that same small step away from something he knew was wrong. The first time another child was being bullied at school. The first time he heard a friend lie to a teacher. He would step back, think, and then choose. Robert always said Daniel had a good heart. It had simply been buried under years of avoiding conflict. Emily, he said quietly, do you hear yourself? Her expression changed. Only for a second. A crack in the perfect mask. What is that supposed to mean? It means my mother is standing here, with burns on her face from something you did, and your biggest concern is whether everyone thinks you're a bad person. The room became silent again. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. For years, I had prayed for him to see me, not as a responsibility, not as an inconvenience, not as a problem that needed to be managed between his wife and his mother, but simply as his mother, the woman who loved him before anyone else knew his name. And in that moment, I saw my little boy returning. Not because he was choosing me over his wife. That was never what I wanted. A good marriage does not require a son to abandon his mother. A healthy family requires everyone to treat each other with dignity. That was all I had ever asked for. Emily laughed softly, but there was no warmth in it. Burns. She shook her head. Oh, please, Margaret. The potatoes weren't even that hot. The moment those words left her mouth, she realized her mistake. The room noticed. Everyone noticed. She had not denied doing it. She had not said it was an accident. She had only argued about how much it should hurt. Her own mother covered her mouth. Her father looked away. The embarrassment on their faces said everything. Daniel noticed too. His eyes widened slightly. You actually did it on purpose. It was not a question. Emily immediately corrected herself. No, Daniel, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? His voice was still calm. That frightened her more. She was used to his silence, used to his excuses, used to him changing the subject to keep the peace. But tonight, peace had become impossible. She looked toward the guests, searching for support, searching for someone to agree with her. Nobody did. Not because they hated her, because truth has a strange way of changing a room. Once everyone sees it clearly, pretending becomes exhausting. I was stressed, she said finally. Do you know how much pressure I was under? The wedding, the guests, everything had to be perfect. I closed my eyes briefly. Not from anger, from sadness. Because after all this time, she still did not understand. She had spent months planning the perfect wedding, the perfect flowers, the perfect dress, the perfect photographs. But she had forgotten the most important part, being a person worth remembering in those photographs. Daniel shook his head slowly. You could have told me you were overwhelmed. I did. You could have walked away. She said nothing. You could have apologized immediately. Silence. You could have checked if my mother was okay. Another silence. Each silence became an answer. Each answer became a mirror. And for the first time, Emily was forced to look into it. I reached for the white envelope still resting in my hand. Not because of the money. Not anymore. That envelope had become something else. A reminder that every decision we make has a price. Sometimes that price is measured in dollars. Sometimes it is measured in trust. And trust is much harder to rebuild. Daniel looked at me. His eyes filled with regret. Mom, he whispered. I could hear the little boy inside that word again. The child who once ran into my arms after every mistake because he believed his mother would help him become better. But tonight was not about returning to the past. It was about deciding what kind of future we would all have. I placed the letter back into the envelope and looked at both of them. The bride, the groom. Two people who had just promised to love and honor one another. Yet neither of them had expected that the first promise they would have to face was much older than their marriage. The promise of how they would treat the people who had loved them before they had anything to offer in return. I took a slow breath. Then I said the words that would force Daniel to make the hardest decision of his life. Daniel, I am not asking you to choose between your wife and your mother. I paused. The entire room waited. I am asking you to choose between the person you have become and the person your father raised you to be. Daniel did not answer immediately. He had spent years avoiding difficult moments. Years choosing silence because silence seemed kinder, easier, less painful. But the truth about silence is that it does not remove pain. It only chooses who carries it. For 6 years, I had carried it. The loneliness, the missing invitations, the empty Sundays, the holidays where I sat beside Robert's old armchair and imagined the sound of Daniel walking through the front door. Now, for the first time, my son was carrying a small part of that weight, and I could see that it was heavier than he expected. His eyes moved from me to Emily, then back to me, the same way he used to look between Robert and me when he was a little boy trying to understand who was right after he had done something wrong. Except this time, his father was not there to guide him, not with a hand on his shoulder, not with that calm voice that could make a frightened child feel safe. Robert had left that responsibility to the lessons he spent a lifetime teaching. And now Daniel had to decide whether he remembered them. Mom, he said quietly. His voice cracked. I don't know how I let this happen. Those words were not a solution. They did not erase 6 years. They did not bring back the birthdays I spent alone. They did not return the Christmas mornings where I wrapped presents for a family that never arrived. but they were something I had not heard in a very long time. They were honesty. I looked at him and remembered a little boy who once came home from school carrying a broken toy truck. He had accidentally stepped on it while playing with his friends. Robert had asked him, "Did you break it on purpose?" Daniel had shaken his head and started crying. "No." "Then why are you crying?" "Because I didn't take care of it." That was the first time Robert taught him that love required responsibility. Not just intention, responsibility. I hope my son remembered that lesson now. "You let it happen one small moment at a time," I said. My voice remained gentle. "There was no single day you stopped being my son." Tears filled his eyes. "There were only days when you stopped noticing that I was being pushed away." The words hurt him. I could see that. But some wounds must be cleaned before they can heal. Daniel slowly nodded. "You're right." 3 simple words. 3 words I had waited years to hear. Not because I wanted to win an argument. Because accountability is the first step back toward love. Emily stepped forward again. Her eyes were red now. Whether from anger, embarrassment, or finally understanding, I could not yet tell. "Daniel, you can't seriously be doing this in front of everyone." There it was. Not "I'm sorry." Not "Margaret, I was wrong." Not "I should never have treated you that way." Her greatest concern was still the audience. The embarrassment. The image. Daniel looked at her. And for the first time since I had known her, he did not rush to rescue her from discomfort. "Emily," he said quietly, "everyone is here because of what happened." She crossed her arms. "She is making me look like a monster." Daniel took a slow breath. "No." The room became still. "You did that yourself." The words were not shouted. They were almost whispered. And somehow, they were stronger because of it. Emily's eyes widened. I remembered the first time she came into my home. She was 26 years old, standing in my kitchen, complimenting the curtains I had sewn with my own hands. "Daniel is lucky to have a mother like you," she had said. I believed her. Maybe she believed herself too. Maybe there had been kindness in her once. Or maybe I had only seen what I wanted to see. That is another thing age teaches you. Love can make us generous, but it can also make us blind. Emily looked around the ballroom. At her parents. At our relatives. At friends who had once laughed at her jokes. No one came to her defense. Not because they wanted to punish her, but because there was nothing left to misunderstand. The truth had been sitting in front of them all evening. The mashed potatoes had only pulled away the curtain. Finally, Emily spoke. Her voice was smaller. I didn't think it was that serious. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was. The closest thing to honesty she had given all night. Not an excuse. Not a performance. Just an admission that she had never considered my feelings. And strangely, that hurt more than the act itself. Because cruelty born from anger can sometimes be understood. Cruelty born from indifference leaves a deeper mark. I stepped closer to her. Not as an enemy. Not as a woman seeking revenge. But as someone who had spent 6 years hoping to be seen. "Emily," I said softly, "do you know what the worst part was?" She looked at me. For the first time all evening, she did not look confident. She looked uncertain. I continued. "It wasn't the potatoes." A tear rolled down my cheek. This time, I did not wipe it away. It wasn't the people watching. I looked toward Daniel. It was seeing my son look away. The room fell silent again. A silence filled not with shock, but with understanding. Because every parent in that room knew that kind of pain. The pain of realizing that the child you protected from the world had allowed the world to hurt you. Daniel began crying openly. Not the quiet tears he had hidden before. The tears of a man realizing that the person he had failed the most was the person who had loved him the longest. "I'm sorry, Mom." Those words reached a place inside me that had been frozen for years. But forgiveness is not a door that opens because someone knocks once. It is a road. A long one. And every step must be walked. I looked at my son, then at the envelope in my hands. The $200,000 was still waiting. The future was still unwritten. A mother could give her son money. A mother could give her son a house. But she could not give him character. That was a gift he had to choose for himself. I carefully placed the envelope back on the podium. The entire ballroom watched. They thought the decision was about the money. They still did not understand. The money had never been the real inheritance. Robert's greatest inheritance had been his values. And tonight, Daniel had finally remembered them. But remembering was only the beginning. Because the next words my son spoke would determine whether this family had reached its ending, or whether, after 6 years of silence, we were finally beginning again. Daniel looked at me. For a moment, I did not see the 50-year-old man standing in an expensive suit on his wedding day. I saw the little boy who used to run across our backyard with scraped knees and a missing shoelace. The boy who used to stand beside his father in the garage, holding a hammer that was too heavy for his small hands. The boy who once asked Robert, "Dad, how do I know if I'm becoming a good man?" And Robert had smiled. That quiet smile I had spent 43 years loving. "You don't become a good man when everyone is watching, son," he had said. "You become one when doing the right thing costs you something." I never forgot those words. And standing there in the middle of that ballroom, surrounded by flowers I had helped choose, music I had helped pay for, and people who had witnessed the worst humiliation of my life, I wondered if Daniel remembered them too. He did. I could see it in his eyes. Because for the first time in years, my son was not looking for a way to end the discomfort. He was looking for a way to face it. He took a step toward me, then another, slowly, like a man walking toward a truth he had avoided for too long. "Mom," he said. His voice was shaking. "I spent the entire evening thinking I had failed as a husband if I stood against my wife." He swallowed. "But I understand now that I failed as a husband the moment I allowed my wife to become someone who could hurt another person without accountability." The room became silent. Emily lowered her eyes. Daniel continued, "I thought staying quiet kept peace." A small, painful smile appeared on his face. "That was something I learned from watching you, Mom." I looked at him, confused. "When Dad was sick, you never complained. When you were lonely after he passed, you never told me how much it hurt. When Emily excluded you, you always said everything was fine." His voice broke. "And I convinced myself that if you weren't complaining, then you weren't suffering." Those words struck me harder than anything else that night. Because he was right. Not about his choices. Those were his responsibility. But I had spent years protecting everyone from my pain. I had folded the empty napkins after canceled Sunday dinners. I had put away Christmas presents that nobody came to open. I had sat beside Robert's empty chair and told myself that being needed was enough. I had confused silence with strength. Maybe Daniel had learned that from me. And maybe both of us had to change. I nodded slowly. "You are right about one thing, Daniel." He looked up. I should have spoken sooner. The room was quiet. Even Emily looked surprised. Not because I was taking responsibility for what happened, but because healing requires honesty from everyone. "I taught you to be kind," I said. "But I forgot to teach you that kindness without boundaries becomes permission." Daniel closed his eyes. A tear fell down his cheek. "I'm sorry, Mom." This time I believed him. Not because his words were perfect. Not because everything was suddenly repaired. But because for the first time in years, he was willing to sit inside his own mistakes instead of running from them. Then he turned toward Emily. The entire ballroom held its breath. Not because they were waiting for another argument. They were waiting to see whether two people who had just promised to spend their lives together understood what marriage truly meant. "Emily," Daniel said quietly. She looked up. For the first time all night, there was no anger on her face. Only exhaustion. Only the realization that her charm could no longer protect her from the truth. "I love you." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I cannot spend my life pretending cruelty is humor." A silence followed. Long, heavy. Necessary. "You hurt my mother." Emily looked down. "I know." 3 words. Small words. Words that had been missing all evening. "I was embarrassed," she whispered. "I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted everyone to see me as someone important." She looked at me. "And somewhere along the way, I treated you like someone who stood in my way." She took a breath. "I was wrong." I looked at her. The young woman who had once stood in my kitchen, holding my mother's cookbook and promising she was grateful to be part of our family. The woman who later made me feel like a visitor in my son's life. Could one apology erase 6 years? No. Some cracks take time to repair. Some trust must be rebuilt slowly. But every bridge begins with a single plank. "I accept your apology," I said. Emily looked surprised. "But acceptance is not the same as forgetting." She nodded. "I understand." And I believed that maybe, for the first time, she actually did. Then Daniel looked at the envelope. "Mom, I don't want the money." A whisper moved through the room. Even now, the words surprised people. $200,000 was enough to change many lives. But perhaps that was the first moment Daniel truly understood the lesson his father left behind. "I want another chance to be your son." My heart broke and healed. At the same time, I smiled through my tears. "Then start tomorrow. Tomorrow. Come for Sunday dinner." A quiet laugh moved through the room. A laugh filled with relief. A tradition that had disappeared years earlier suddenly had a chance to return. Daniel smiled. The roast. The roast. Mashed potatoes? For the first time that entire evening, I laughed. A real laugh. Not a polite one. Not one meant to hide pain. Yes, I said. Mashed potatoes. The entire room laughed softly. Because sometimes the things that hurt us the most can become proof that they no longer have power over us. As the evening came to an end, I walked outside the ballroom alone for a moment. The night air was cool. The stars stretched above me. And I thought about Robert. I imagined him sitting in his old chair, smiling that gentle smile. Not because his family was perfect. We never were. No family is. But because the truth had finally been spoken. And truth, no matter how painful, is the beginning of every real healing. I never gave Daniel the $200,000 that night. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because some gifts must wait until people understand how to receive them. Months later, we started again. Slowly. Sunday dinners returned. Conversations became honest. Apologies were followed by changed behavior. And one afternoon, I opened my mother's old cookbook and found a new handwritten note inside. It was from Emily. It said, "Thank you for giving me a second chance to learn what family truly means." I placed the note beside Robert's old letters. Because both belonged to the same story. A story about love. A story about mistakes. A story about forgiveness. And a story about remembering that the greatest inheritance we leave behind is never money. It is the way we teach the people we love to treat one another. The hottest thing on my son's wedding day was never the mashed potatoes. It was the truth that had been buried for 6 years. And once that truth finally came to the surface, our family had a chance to begin again.